Greetings and welcome to the latest edition of the Entheogenic Evolution podcast. As always, I'm your host Martin, and I'm happy to have you with me today. For this week's episode, we are returning to the theme of entheogenic churches and psychedelic religions in the United States. My guest is Scott Stanley. He is the founder of the Arizona Yahé Assembly, as well as the North American Association of Visionary Churches. We met the other month and had a rather lengthy conversation about these topics of defending religious freedom in the United States, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, how it applies to entheogenic churches and psychedelic sacraments. This, of course, is a recurring theme here on the Entheogenic Evolution podcast. It's something that I've had guests on and talking about over the past 18 years. And of course, there's always new developments, and that's what we're talking about here with Scott and what inspired him to form these organizations and what he hopes others will get out of it and how it can help transform legal right to work with entheogenic sacraments in the United States. We'll get to that in just a minute, but of course, a few announcements first. Over on my YouTube channel for the Entheogenic Evolution, just wanted to let you, the listeners, know that I've added a couple new things over there that might be of interest to you. The first is I had a conversation the other week with a researcher in England who came with 9 questions about 5-MeO-DMT in terms of facilitation, therapy, and integration. And we ended up recording that talk that we had on Zoom, and I've made the audio of our conversation available over at the Entheogenic Evolution channel on YouTube. The title of that video is 9 Questions and Answers about 5-MeO-DMT. It's a little over an hour and a half long. I did have to remove the video and also as much audio of the researcher as possible because he was not permitted to give a public appearance on this topic by his university, but my answers are available there, and I invite you to go over and check that out and enjoy that. Also, over this past week, I made another video for YouTube, and this one is on what I'm calling the 5-MeO-DMT diagnostic round, what it is, how it works, and how to work with it. You can find both of these videos at the 5-MeO-DMT, the God Molecule playlist on the Entheogenic Evolution YouTube channel. Speaking of playlists over at YouTube, also want to remind you that with this conversation with Scott Stanley today, that is going to be joining my Psychedelic Churches, Religion, and Spirituality playlist at the Entheogenic Evolution on YouTube. So if you have any difficulty finding it, just look for the playlist, and this interview will be there. Beyond YouTube, yes, beyond the world of YouTube. Of course, I'm always available for 30, 60, and 90-minute integration calls to help you integrate your entheogenic experience from a non-dual and energetic perspective. I specialize in 5-MeO-DMT, but I'm not limited to that in any way, shape, or form. You can stop by my personal webpage at martinball.net to get more information about my integration services, or just shoot me an email at martinwball@gmail.com. And to remind you, as I do every week, this is a listener-supported podcast. If you would like to support the podcast by making a financial contribution, I invite you to stop by my Patreon page at patreon.com/martinwball. There's everything from $1 a month up to $100 a month. At the $100 a month level, you also get a complimentary 1-hour video call with me once a month to just shoot the shit, to talk about non-duality and entheogens, or to help you integrate your experience, or even to provide mentoring or feedback for your own practice or your own facilitation. Let's see. I think that's pretty much all that I've got for you here today. Before we launch into this conversation, let me just also let you know that if you want to learn more about the North American Association of Visionary Churches, as founded by Scott Stanley, you can visit them online at naavc.org. And I'll have a link for that available in the comments to the podcast. Anyway, thank you for listening to the Entheogenic Evolution podcast. Of course, there are more interviews coming in the weeks to come. This coming week, actually, I've got a couple new interviews lined up. I'm going to be having Steve Rio, once again from Enfold. We're going to be talking about the Letke protocol of injection plus vaporizing of 5-MeO-DMT. Supposedly, I have an interview with Susie Calypso from the Temple of Eden down in Southern California, which is a Bufo church. We've tried to do an interview several times before, and things have come up and she has not been available, but I'm hoping that is going to happen this coming week. So we'll see. I'll let you know next week here on the podcast about what happened or didn't happen. Anyway, thanks for listening. Here's my conversation with Scott Stanley. Hope you enjoy it. It's a long one, so just settle in and relax, or maybe plan to break it out into a couple different listening sessions. All right? Talk to you next week. Well, I'm excited to welcome on to the Entheogenic Evolution podcast today, Scott Stanley. And Scott is going to be wearing a couple different hats in our conversation today because he is the founder, the Arizona Yagé Assembly, or perhaps you pronounce it Yahe. I'll ask you that in a second. And we're also going to be talking about his organization. Let me just grab it here. I've got the website open. This is the North American Association of Visionary Churches. And today we are going to be talking about the legal right to work with entheogenic sacraments in the United States. And I'm really excited to have you on the show today, Scott.
Same here, Martin. Thanks for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So I'm going to invite you to introduce yourself and get into these topics in just a second, but I just wanted to share just a little bit of history. First of all, my PhD is in religious studies, so I've been interested in this kind of question for a long time. And I was actually I did a little search on my computer this morning before jumping on this call with you, and I found that my first discussion of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and its application for the religious right to entheogenic sacraments, first talked about that here on the podcast in 2008. So this has been a long-running topic here on the podcast. And then that became a chapter of my book, in the Entheogenic Evolution from 2008. And then that chapter was then repurposed into the Psychedelic Policy Quagmire, which is an anthology from a number of different authors. It was published a few years later. And also just want to mention to the listening audience that I've been organizing the episodes from the podcast on my YouTube channel and have just created a brand new playlist called Psychedelic Churches, Religion, and Spirituality, where people can find all of the episodes that relate to this topic on the entheogenic evolution from the past few years, not all the way back to 2008, but just over the past few years, are now available at a playlist through the Entheogenic Evolution YouTube channel. So there's been a lot of discussions around this, but I think that you've got some interesting stuff to share with us today. So just to get us started, now that that little bit of background and history is out of the way, with the new guest, Scott, I always like to start with just inviting you to kind of tell your personal story, anything you'd want to share there of how you got into this world. And then, we're going to be focusing on the North American Association of Visionary Visionary Churches, and I believe you have a legal case currently with your own church working its way through the courts. We're going to be discussing all of that, but I'd like to invite, again, let's start with you a little bit.
Yeah, 2008 is an interesting date. I started working with the medicine about 2008, 2009 myself. And then in 2015, we started the Arizona Yahe Assembly. And since then, since 2015, I probably led well over 600 ceremonies, and that's just since 2015. So we have a number of people come through ceremony regularly. We've been pretty consistent. There was a good stretch of time there where I was road dogging a lot, traveling around the country, West Coast, Midwest, East Coast as well. So whether it's like we were in the Louisiana Bayou, we were in the Midwest, we were up in the Northwest and Washington, Oregon, and or snowstorms in New Hampshire, Island, and Maine. It's a lot of driving, a lot of getting around. And now we're kind of anchored to Tucson, Arizona. We have a 50-foot yurt out in the desert. And there was a juncture in the court case where the judge is like, "You guys are going to break the you're going to break the law. You want to violate the Controlled Substances Act. You need to commit to a concrete plan." And we, at that point, this was 5 years ago. We've been, just as an organization, we've been doing ceremonies for a solid 5 years, and I guess this is Well, no, by this point, it was about two. So we'd been doing about 8 years. So this is 2023. We were well into the case, and we needed to commit to concrete plans. Turns out we were just finishing up a 50-foot yurt out in the desert. And so our response to that was, well, as a matter of fact, we're doing ceremony out in the desert west of Tucson every 2 weeks, and we have a 50-foot yurt, what we call a maloca. That's what they call these roundhouses down in Peru. Uh, and so it's been uh, it's been a process trying to educate the legal system and bring them around to understanding the case law, which includes the Santo Daime case with Jonathan Goldman, includes Jeffrey Brofman's case that went all the way to the Supreme Court, landmark cases. Our judge, when we were at our last hearing, and by the way, we've gone through 5 different judges, roughly, and so we had 2 judges recuse themselves. So even opposing counsel was speculating a little bit as to whether the judges were recusing themselves because they had sat with ayahuasca. Wouldn't be beyond the pale. And so, but that said, at our last hearing, the judge did a couple of things that really couldn't stood out for me. One, she pronounced it ayahuasca. So at that point, she had never heard the word ayahuasca spoken.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting. We'd expect a little bit more from her. And then there was she'd never heard of a case called Ocentro, which is the case Jeffrey Brofman brought and pushed all the way to the Supreme Court. That's the Una de Vegetal case. Never heard of it. She asked counsel. He'd mentioned Ocentro, and her question was to him was, what's that? So now we've been in this position where we've tried to educate them as to the case law surrounding the RFRA, these religious reform cases, and it's step by step. I think we're doing it, but it's in many respects. I think they'd like to try these cases as drug cases rather than civil rights and civil liberties cases.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot to talk about there, but I'm still interested, if you don't mind, telling a little bit about how you got into this area of working with Yahé in the first place and kind of offering it as a religious sacrament and kind of taking that leap. Because, there's a lot of people who work with ayahuasca, but not everyone goes about, well, I'm going to create a center, create a church, and then go through the trouble of claiming religious freedom rights and civil rights around cases like this. So how did you get into this world in the first place?
Well, I moved out to Tucson a bunch of years ago, and I was looking for, this is back in the 90s, and I was looking for, I was fascinated by Carlos Castaneda's book, or his series of books. His background as an anthropologist, and then this description of becoming slowly inculcated into the world of Yaqui Indian shaman. And so the stories were fascinating for me. So I was looking for Castaneda. I moved out to Tucson. And when I got out here, I found him, but it turns out he was in Los Angeles. So I went out to LA to practice with some of the things that he was teaching out there. And in the process, he was teaching something he called tensegrity, just a series of movements, kind of looks a little bit like Tai Chi. And he purported those to be drawn from the Yaqui Indian dreaming practices, and that they would produce all sorts of effects in terms of your state of awareness and your capacity to dream. So after several years of effectively training with Castaneda and his troupe, a friend of mine who was also practicing invited me to an ayahuasca ceremony. This was up in Northern California. So he said, do you want to go to an ayahuasca ceremony? I said, sure. But I really didn't know anything about ayahuasca. And so there was a troupe that had come up from, it was a Kafan troupe that had come up from Colombia. So it was in Northern California. And the process, the ceremony took off up in the redwoods, and I was the guy who was kind of wandering out the bucket, wondering when it was going to kick in. I was out there like looking for the seven dwarfs. I don't see anything, and I stepped off into the shadows, and I closed my eyes for just a little bit. And as soon as I did, I saw this entirely different world. I was there with my eyes closed, and then as soon as I opened them again, the world was just the way I left it. And when I closed my eyes again, I was looking through my eyelids, looking at my hands, and with the realization, wow, look at that. I'm infinite right down to the floorboards. So while I was in the medicine out there in the shadows, 100 feet or so away from the lodge out there in the redwoods, I started practicing some of these movements that Castaneda was teaching. And my realization at the time was, wow, these movements are tailor-made for navigating the medicine. And so I spent hours out there in the redwoods before I went back into the lodge. And at one point I heard this kind of crunching sound. I smelled the smell of Palo Santo in the air. I knew it was one of the troop members was coming out, and he was burning some incense. And as he came up to me and sort of, I could feel him kind of circle around me. He still had my eyes closed. He said, "How are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm doing just fine."
Yeah.
And then he kept on walking for a little bit. And then as he was walking away back to the lodge, I heard him say, "Good morning." And I thought, "Good morning? Like, what time is it? How long have I been out here?" That was my initiation with ayahuasca. But the funny thing is that prior to that, I had been making these big pots of pau d'arco. And I only realized years later that pau d'arco is a South American master plant. It's very often used in connection with ayahuasca, depending, there's the regional variances, but where more pau d'arco is a local plant in the Brazilian rainforest. It's used as a master plant. And at one point, I even found a triptych of pau d'arco with ayahuasca vines growing up it. And I'm like, oh, isn't that interesting? I stepped into that first ceremony very, very green. And yet, on an intuitive level, I was doing things that it took some time to realize in full scope, in retrospect, that I was actually following paths and procedures that had been mapped down and have been applied with ayahuasca for literally hundreds of years. So go figure.
Yeah. So did that then become a shift for you into exploring ayahuasca more? And was there a shift away from Carlos Castaneda in his teachings, or did you find that was something that you wanted to incorporate together and continue with these tensegrity exercises, or how did that proceed after that initiation?
I think, over time, I've realized that, one of the sort of the central loci, or one of the central focuses of Castaneda is intent. And uh, over time, I've realized that intent is absolute gold. And so, if there's any one thing I've drawn from uh, my time with Castaneda, and that was years ago, is just that: is the focus on intent. And the that said, I still treat these movements, tensegrity, kind of like this, like I call it funky Tai Chi, the as a daily exercise. So I'll do these movements on a daily, pretty much a daily basis, and then take a little time meditating on intent. And that so I've effectively, in many ways, I'm sort of set. I've noticed that Castaneda ages really well. Like, there are elements of it that age really well. And there's also, he was quite a controversial character. He's also the he was quite a raconteur, amazing storyteller, and he was absolutely, his sense of humor, his ability to engage an audience was really kind of stunning to watch. But Castaneda had more than a few awards, so I think I'm happy to maintain my critical faculties around that kind of topic. And I've over time kind of set that aside. So when we do ceremony, I'm not talking about Carlos Castaneda, but the that was my entree into it. And if there's any one item that I return to when it as regards Castaneda and his writings, it would be intent. But at the same time, really, I think, to get back to your question, or like an element of your question, is it's this. We're talking about this element like religion. Mm-hmm. So I grew up in my family went to. I grew up in New England, and as a kid, went to a little congregational church with my family. So, little white church with a steeple out there in Wayland, Massachusetts. Grew up in a little town called Acton, not too far from Concord, and where they the Concord Bridge. So back in my day, a liberal was a farmer with a rifle on his hip, and it's interesting to consider. But back, if I go back to my initial roots or introduction to religion, I have to say that I developed a pretty strong allergy to it and to the church intoning. And then as I looked at the wider picture, I saw the hypocrisy of it. And it's really earned its reputation as very, very often a damaging force in people's lives. And it's, the kind of top-down, nonsensical, hypocritical approach is an issue. And so, and it was an issue for me personally. So it was as I stepped in to working with ayahuasca more and more, what I saw was the power of a direct connection with divinity. And that, particularly with repeated travels down to Peru, with no intermediary, no minister, no priest, no one interpreting a written text, a direct apprehension.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a time when, so on my mom's side, my dad's side, they were Methodists, and so they were effectively pacifists. They were Methodists and Quakers, so they were pacifists, and they were back in the Civil War, they were anti-slave, and as Quakers, worked the Underground Railroad. And on my mom's side, she grew up in a little Amish Mennonite community, so they were pacifists as well, and got kicked around Europe. And so with that kind of background, I had kind of a unique view of religion. So one day when I was back in Indiana, I was visiting this little town. Went to visit the family, and was there at the house in Goshen, Indiana. My uncle takes me aside. He says, "Scott, you want to tell me about this little church of yours, this little ayahuasca church?" And I said, "Merle, what if you just started with the experience of love and forgiveness?" And that's all I need to say. Beyond that, for him, there was no debate. And so as a little church out in the desert, that's essentially what we do. We start with the experience of love and forgiveness. And we're not telling anybody how to love or how to forgive. But it is stunning to see what happens when people see that for themselves. How through the lens of their own direct witness of, we'll call it the non-material. And you could call it divinity. And when people step into ceremony, who have points of view based on let's say, we'll call it the hypocrisy of religion, which has made them sort of dyed-in-the-wool atheists. And they stop in the ceremony, and they come to a different conclusion, mainly because they've spent their life focused on the empirical evidence. And so once they see with their own eyes, they're like, well, I'm not going to, deny we'll call it the empirical evidence based on a belief system. And so I think it's possible if you have, it's actually possible. So the effect has been for me that, and the conclusion I've come to is that an organized spiritual practice, by definition, is a religious practice. And over the years, I've talked with plenty of people who've said, hey, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. And the reason they say that is because religion's been taken up by the big boys, and it's top down, and it's hypocritical, and it's used to manipulate people for various, we'll just call it political reasons. I'll use that word loosely. And that's an issue. And so people have engaged spiritually and set religious classification aside. But when they do that, they give up all of those constitutionally protected rights, the right to practice freely. And so I think for a lot of people, there's my take on it is there's a lot of denial out there. There are people that are engaged in religious practice and they just don't want to call it a religious practice because religion, the very word religion is such a foul, melodious word, right? That the people, like people don't even want to be associated with it. It stinks. But I really do think it's possible to reinscribe the word. And so today, I don't have a problem with the word religion in terms of taking it back. And so that we can step into federal court and we don't have to be anything other than what we are. There's no absolutely zero pretense of trying to be churchy enough for the DEA, which would be absolutely absurd. For instance, like if you go into a Quaker church, I defy you to find a cross or even a minister or a sermon. They don't do that. That's not how the Quakers work. Now it's quite a cry from the Sistine Chapel. So there's a spectrum for you from the Vatican to Quaker's Friend's House, and there are a lot of other variations as well. So I find it preposterous the DEA wants to regulate religion. And I think we're pretty clear that the DEA does not hire any experts on comparative religions. No. They don't know what they're talking about. They are not in a position. And in terms of our court case, we've had to point out that the DEA doesn't have any constitutional authority to regulate religious belief, and so it's one of the essential points. It's where we sort of started. The DEA has had an exemption process in place, and then you could apply into their exemption process, and you could fill out their application. You could describe your religion for them in terms of gaining an exemption, and they've yet to issue a single exemption to an active church since it started. So that's been 15 years. So it's a fraud. And the issue is that if you apply for this exemption process, it's required as part of that process to stop your religious practice. You can't drink ayahuasca until they deem you to be a church, which is, to use a term of art in the law, prior restraint. So they think that's okay. And that's one of the elements that we challenged right from the very beginning. I think they put their exemption process in disarray, and there were some the rulings that required them to go back to the drawing board on it. But they issued their first exemption about a year and a half ago to a small church that had not sued. All the other exemptions involve lawsuits, so they don't really count because they're tied. They take a lot of time. There's a lot of expense, and so that's not exactly a free process. It's extremely burdensome process. We've been suing the DEA for 5 years now, and I could tell you some stories. It is, and there are a lot of dirty tricks involved, and the effort is to sort of bleed you dry, and to stop it. Like our legal case, as I see it, spawned all sorts of other legal cases. And based on our scholarship, and the lessons we learned, we've had several churches that have earned an exemption. But for the one church that filed for an exemption and got it, they weren't even practicing. They didn't have any membership. They didn't have ayahuasca ceremonies. And the guy that started said he was going to go down to Peru and find a shaman and learn. It wasn't even a practice yet. And on the basis of that, they granted the exemption. Meanwhile, we have over 5,000 members. That means 5,000 people have come through ceremony. Like, we don't do crackerjack. We don't issue membership cards. I think that's silly. Like, it's not up to me. People step in the ceremony, they see for themselves, they're part of it. Or to turn a phrase, it's not a club, but let's just say, to turn a phrase, they're in the club, right? That's not up to me. People see it firsthand, and they're we count them as members. So it is now with over 5,000, and part of the issue in the court case right now is they want everybody's name. They want everybody's email address. They want everybody's telephone number. They want everybody's correspondence with us. And what we've told them is absolutely not. That's completely out of proportion and in violation of all sorts of case law. And then it completely ignores this. Our case, which they're defendants, not plaintiffs. It's disproportional, and it defies all sorts of other rulings under the RFRA, under the religious reform laws. So we are battling in court, and it's effectively, we'll call it a distraction, trying to keep our membership becoming publicly known inside the court case. So there would be a protective order, and then it would be under seal, and then the names and the emails and all those correspondence would be locked inside the court case, and then the DEA would say, "Hey, we're not going to share it with anybody." But they get kind of a bad reputation, as it turns out. There's also something called parallel construction, and where information leaks, and then law enforcement agencies use that information and use strategies to then reintroduce it in other court cases, while hiding its actual origin. This is all totally against the law. But, parallel construction, turns out, is a real thing. On top of that, federal courts, over the course of particularly the last 5 years, have had major hacks, major data breaches. And they're not really that forthcoming as to how bad they are. I suspect they're far worse than even they state publicly. Right. So against that backdrop, a protective order doesn't mean, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't mean anything. Right. There are all sorts of people who come to ceremony, and for various reasons, they need to maintain their privacy. There was a court case, Alabama. It was NAACP v. Alabama, and back then the state of Alabama wanted the full membership list of the NAACP. That's the Association of Colored People, and so back in the day, they were fighting against Jim Crow laws and segregation. So the state of Alabama comes along and says, we want your membership list. And they said no. And that case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And so associational privacy was a key element there. It's enshrined. And yet the Department of Justice is who back in the day was actually kind of, I think, may have even written an amicus brief on that. Like back in the day, the U.S. Department of Justice would fight for civil liberties, and not anymore. Not now. In this case, it's the exact opposite. And so, what we get is, you got a protective order, not a big deal. It's a big deal for a membership. It's a big deal for people who stepped in the ceremony. Believe it or not, they don't trust the DEA.
Yeah.
And, believe it or not, they actually read the newspapers, and they can see that like the federal courthouses are not as secure as federal judges might think. It's unfortunate, but you have this kind of activity going on in and around federal courthouses, but the membership, or 5,000 strong membership, doesn't want their names released. And I think they've got a right to their privacy, and they've got a right to practice freely. And they've got a right to make a direct connection with divinity without the DEA stepping in to assess how they practice and what way they practice, where they practice, when they practice, and how they practice. It's like there's like and at the same time, the DEA has published no criteria for making this assessment. And with their exemption, they have established no timetable for making that assessment. And when we ask them for those assessments, they won't tell us. They refuse to issue any of that information to us during discovery. It is preposterous. And what they're attempting to do is to bleed us dry. It's a very expensive case, right? But it's stressful for people. I like my personal constitution seems to be okay. I seem to be able to handle it just fine. But I can tell you, not everybody handles it just fine. And I've seen like pressures placed on other churches where it has completely blown them out of the water. They've imploded because of actions that have been taken by the DEA and their membership.
Yeah. So, Scott, I'd love to just jump in here and provide a little bit of historical context for listeners, and then we can get back into all of these issues. So if you don't mind me just interrupting for a little bit. First of all, I want to go back to the point that you made about being religious versus being spiritual. And I think that that's a really important part of this whole conversation, that it's important to recognize that in the United States, there are no protected rights around being spiritual. That's not a protected category of right, but if you are religious, then you do have a protected category of behavior, and that we do have laws around that. And so this goes back for anybody who's ignorant of this, which seems we have a lot of in our society at present. First of all, in contradiction with the Christian nationalists who are currently infiltrated into the federal government, the United States was never founded as a Christian country. That the original founders of the country were deists. They had a philosophical view of coming from the Enlightenment about what is the nature of God, what is the nature of religion, what is the nature of empirical evidence, as you have already mentioned. And they intentionally did not create a religious theocracy or a religious state. And then in the very first amendment of the U.S. Constitution, I've got it right here, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Therefore, it says right there in the Constitution that we cannot have any particular religious test for protection within the United States, and the government itself cannot establish a national religion. That's against the Constitution. And then the next bit is or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So this is where we get right there in the very First Amendment to the Constitution that the government cannot be in charge of religion, and also it cannot prohibit the free exercise of religion. So this is why, if you're in the United States, it is to your advantage to be able to claim I'm a member of a religion, because once you claim that, you are then granted a whole number of rights that somebody who says, well, I'm spiritual, they don't have any rights. But if you're a member of religion, you have certain rights. Now, a little bit more historical context. For example, Native American cultures were deemed by the government as not being religious. They were deemed as having cultural and spiritual traditions. And because of that, Native American tribes and nations and cultures, they were not granted any religious freedom protections, and that the government decided that they could basically outlaw their cultural practices and then hand it over the reservations to various Christian denominations to bring them into Christianity. And then an exception to this was the formation of the Native American Church around the use of peyote, and that was incorporated as an official church and religion in the United States well over 100 years ago. But all this was done at the time that Native American cultures themselves were denied any kind of religious freedom protections from the government because it was determined that they didn't have religion. Then this came to a head in the 1990s with a case here in Oregon with a member of the Native American Church who was fired from his job and denied benefits because he attended the Native American Church and ate peyote. And this was now in the throes of the Just Say No war on drugs. And so he was told, no, you took an illegal drug. We don't care if that's your religion. You're fired and you don't get your benefits. So that went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ultimately said, well, you're free to believe whatever you want. So you can believe that peyote is a divine sacrament and it's part of your religion. But as soon as you practice that and eat it, you're breaking the law. So then that inspired Congress to create the Religious Freedom Restoration Act for the United States in general, and then also inspired the Native American Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which actually recognized the religious rights of Native Americans and specifically around the use of peyote, but more broadly speaking about kind of reorienting around the idea that Native American cultures do have religions, not just cultural practices and spirituality. So that was a fairly seismic shift in the world of Native Americans. And then it wasn't until some decades later that we had the Santo Daime case here in Ashland, Oregon. That's when I was attending the Church of the Holy Light of the Queen, which they took the government to court to claim their religious freedom protections for drinking ayahuasca. And a little bit earlier, but right around the same time, we had the Unión de Vegetal case in New Mexico, where their huasca was confiscated, but they ultimately got that back and recognized that it was a religious sacrament. But the difference here is that both the Santo Daime and the Unión de Vegetal are established religions in Brazil, and that they have been imported into the United States. So here I wanted to circle back to the formation of the Arizona Yahe Assembly, and your construction of that as a religious organization. I haven't heard you mention that it's based on either Santo Daime or Unión de Vegetal. And here's where we're getting into the definition of a religion. So I think that there was a certain advantage to the Santo Daime and the UDV because they could say, hey, these are established religions in Brazil. But as you've already mentioned, that we have the federal government and judges and the DEA, they've been placed in the position of they need to determine what is an authentic religion and what is not. And I've always argued that, like, again, my background is in religious studies. We used to have whole classes about how we can't even define what religion is, because as soon as we define religion, we're most likely going to be relying on a particular cultural or religious tradition that defines religion. And then we're going to be able to go out and find a whole bunch of examples that don't fit that mold. So there's a lot of cultural bias into defining what is or is not considered a religion. Like you were mentioning with the Quakers, their form of religious practice would be unrecognizable to a Catholic. That they would say, well, no, this isn't religion. But for Quakers, that's the religion. So how we define religion plays a big role in determining whether we're even able to see if it exists or not. Because like going back to Native American cultures, their religious practices didn't look like religion to Europeans. So they said, oh, they don't have any religion. And they didn't have a holy book. That was a big part of it. Well, they don't have a book. And well, we've got a Bible. That's what religion is. They don't have churches. That's what religion is. They don't have ministers that or preachers or priests. That's what religion is. So they weren't able to see it. They didn't even recognize it as being religious. So again, going back to Arizona Yahe Assembly, how did you go about establishing that this is a religious practice? And I'm also a little bit curious about what inspired that, because of course there's been lots of people who have been very moved by ayahuasca, and then, well, I'm going to facilitate trips down to South America, or I'm going to bring shamans up here, but do it all underground, not actually form a church, not try and claim that religious freedom, right, and kind of do it under the idea of this is healing or it's spirituality. But again, once you claim a religion, that opens you up to a whole new area of religious protection, even though the people who are offering that protection, the judges, the courts, and the DEA, they're not qualified, in my opinion, to determine what is or is not a religion. So anyway, I just wanted to provide a little bit more context and a little historical data points there. And let's get back into the Arizona Yahe Assembly. Sorry for that digression, Scott.
No, it's really central to all of this. And, if we were to talk about what defines us as a religion, I can actually answer that question. Let's just say you take a look at the question is just where to start. So, very often within ayahuasca circles, people talk about protection and how you protect people, how you protect them, how do you protect their spirit, how do you protect them in terms of their experience, and then how do you protect them against negative influences. I think that level of protection, that umbrella of protection, not only extends over the individual or the circle that's practicing, or the maloka, or the area that they're practicing, or the families, the communities that are practicing, but extends far broader to legal protections. Without those legal protections, there is a cloud of criminality that casts its shadow over all of these circles, and it's flat out wrong. I want to live my life freely, free to practice, free to engage in my religious practice, and it is not for a federal agency to make that determination. But then the question is, then who makes the determination? So if you want to jump from the First Amendment to the 10th Amendment, 10th Amendment basically says all those powers that aren't entrusted at the federal level or the state level are given to the people. So if the federal government is precluded from, denied the power of determining who is a religion, what is a religion, and if at the state level that's also prevented, then who's given that right to self-determination? The congregations are. Congregations determine what is religion. And it's That is what, in a nutshell, we're fighting over. Who has the right to self-determination? Is the federal government? The answer quite clearly is no. We've got the First and 10th Amendment on our side. I don't want the DEAs. They're not crawling into the Maloka. They can't see it. They like the experience of, for instance, we've been approached by Vice and the Real World when it was MTV. They wanted to come out with cameras and film our ayahuasca ceremonies, and then one of them even said, "Hey, I can't tell you who, but we'll have some celebrities." And my answer, I was being kind, was, "I don't think so." Which is to say, absolutely not, never. You're not going to bring a camera into our ceremony. Why? Because it is, and you can't. First of all, you can't see it unless you're actually sitting with the medicine. But it's an aberration. It's going to kick other people out. It's effectively, it's sacred.
Yeah.
And it's not sacred because there's a doctrine around it being sacred. It's sacred because I can tell you from my experience of having 50,000 people come through ceremony, for those people, for those individuals, it's sacred, right? And I don't need to use church intoning to make that so. I can be absolutely matter of fact about it. I don't have to be. It can be absolutely zero pretense. All we're asking for is for us to be to stand up, and for the individuals and the members of our church to be able to step in freely into religious practice in which our congregation holds the right to self-determination. So, in terms of this court case, what do? We sent out we polled our membership, and of course, the overwhelming majority of our church membership considers this a religious practice. Okay, it also happens to be a spiritual practice. It's not a religious practice without a spiritual practice. It's not a spiritual practice without a religious practice. It's both, quite obviously. And it's tied to people's direct witness of divinity, of love and forgiveness. I would love the DEA to let that sink in. And unfortunately, and the high side is that I really honestly don't think that there's a single member of the DEA that's against us. It's institutional. It's institutional inertia. I've talked with them. I don't think anyone's got a dog in the fight. I don't think they really care. At best, they don't care. But there's nobody against us, right? And they've all witnessed the limits of, let's say, Western medicine, or the limits of the empty religious practice. And I think increasingly what people see is that there is potential and the possibility for bona fide, genuine religious practice that engages the individual in direct witness of what you could safely call the non-material. And but since it is non-material, it's non-measurable. And so, I've seen researchers, and we've been through 2 studies, and we've got a 3rd study on the way. And I've gone to go to a lot of these psychedelics conferences and talk with folks at MAPS and take a look at the research. And it's fascinating. We went to the Consciousness Conference. So it's hosted every 2 years at the University of Arizona. It's that's a big deal, and people flying from all over the world trying to understand these things. And it's as if you have all these researchers on the sidelines with their hands on their chins going, it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. This mystical experience, if we could just understand this mystical experience, we could tap it into so many therapies. it's denied them. It's not, you're not going to see it with a video, and you're not going to see it with an MRI. It's like, you're not going to see it with all sorts of tests. There's something called the mystical experience questionnaire. They call the MEQ. And, one of the studies that we were involved in with Melbourne University, they used the MEQ, and they can measure it around the edge. But it's a lot harder to measure it from the inside. Yeah. If you're doing kind of chemical assay or you're trying to use MRIs, it's the direct witness that makes all the difference. So whether we're talking, that said, we're not throwing out like I said, we're not throwing out our critical faculties. We're happy to work with researchers, just as long as that their involvement is non-invasive, because we do, see at the penumbra, at the outer edge of these experiences, that people see dramatic shifts because they're engaged in healing of their spirits. And so I've seen like people with Parkinson's and not hardly being able to sort of walk up to the altar, have their Parkinson's go into remission for months at a stretch. Or I've seen combat vets come in with just horrific PTSD, like situationally hyper aware, not being able to sort of look you in the eye, up with their backs to the wall. I've seen them come in, understanding their backstory and how tenuous their connection with staying on planet Earth is. 22 vets, by some estimates, by some low estimates, killed themselves every single day because they're tortured by their experiences in combat. And I've seen so many vets get to the other side of this, and it's spiritual engagement, and we have shared values with our congregation in healing the spirit. I see how the group helps to heal the group, how the congregation helps to heal the congregation, like with each person attending to their own direct witness to the spirit itself. It's extraordinary. It's absolutely the stories people have to tell in the morning. When I see like people renewed, like very often I'll look at someone dead in the eye and tell them, "Hey, happy birthday." They laugh because they know, even if it's not their birthday, it's their birthday. They've been absolutely renewed. So my little cardboard sign is, I'll work for inspiration. And that's what I'm working for. I'm working for inspiration. Why am I doing this? I like what got me involved in it. I was kind of dragged into it. I felt like I was kind of like some people say, "Hey, did medicine call you?" I think it did, and I think I wasn't listening. And because I wasn't listening, I was kind of dragged in. And at a certain point, I just couldn't help myself. And and for so many people that are involved and working with ayahuasca and working with these ayahuasca circles and understand and finally gotten over their sense of denial and realizing they're engaged in religious practice. Not just spiritual, but like shared community values, like religious practice, I mean, for AYA, we have our tenets, all right? But those tenets are so like embedded in the experience that even for people who haven't read them, it doesn't matter. They're like, they read through the tenets and like, oh, right, that's the map. Like people just nod. It's understood. The text is in the medicine. Like you want the text? That's in the medicine. And then people they read the text and then their direct witness, and it leads them all sorts of places. It may lead them to actual text. it leads them to other like religious texts, right? And like we're not here, like we're not promulgating a single religious text. Like, so here's a notion for you. Like, like imagine a religion with the First Amendment. Kind of hard, right? Like where you're like, freedom of expression and freedom to like to engage with your religious practice. What if you had a First Amendment within a religious practice? I think that's what we got. I think that's what we have in for ayahuasca, for all of these churches out there. They are like they're little churches that where people are like drinking the text, seeing directly, making a direct connection with divinity, and then modeling what it means to speak freely and encouraging other people to speak freely directly from their point of conscience, right? Engaging with their connection with and a free expression of their conscience, and not letting that be pricked, but peace of mind. I like my own personal evolution. It's like once upon a time, I remember when I had a conscience. So it's my little joke, right? And I remember when I had a conscience, and then I remember when I lost it, and then I remember when my evolution became I've regained it, and my philosophy became peace of mind. Why would I sacrifice that? Why? Right? And so I am and I'm inspired to see how people heal, and I'm inspired to see people thread the needle and step into like states of love and forgiveness. And I'm inspired to see how that affects people's family life, and it gives them a whole new view of their own life, loving and accepting view of their life, and how precious that is. Right? Like key questions of life and death, right, are like the key elements of any religious practice. Why are you here? What is your purpose? Right? What is your sense of like, how do you engage with your conscience? How do you engage with your community? How do you engage with love and forgiveness? Like all key elements. But like the essential element when it comes to, are you a religion? Or are you not a religion? Does the congregation think it's a religious practice? All right. And like, and just like any religion, where people just come through, like maybe on holidays, and maybe they don't practice, they don't read it, they don't like, there are people who just like who step in on, and it's there's no like clear metric to say whether you're like a true Catholic or not, or true Baptist or not. And then there may be some, within religious circles who can be kind of bickering and the rest of it. I'm happy to say I don't see a lot of that within ayahuasca circles. I don't see that kind of bickering. I see people like honoring people's like sense of like their own intuitive view, their conscience, and establishing a protective and supportive frame for people to engage honestly around the topic of direct witness to divinity. And people step into that at their own pace. It can't be forced, right? It can be forced, but there's a price to be paid for that. So we take people that can come in at their own level, right? And then the people learn over time. People heal over time. All right. Like, so from that, I guess that's as much of a nutshell as I can put put all this, what's religion question, and that's as short as I get on
Yeah.
on that particular topic. But it's a big one, as you pointed out, with deep historical roots.
Yeah. So I'd love to just offer a little commentary and reflection on some of what you just shared there. So again, just to sort of start out with a distinction, the advantages with the Santa Daime and the UDV is that they could check off a lot of boxes for the standard American cultural assumption about what is a religion versus what isn't a religion. So, for example, do they have founding prophets? Yeah, they've got that. Do they have a well articulated doctrine and dogma? Yeah, they got that. Do they have a place of practice and a place of worship? Well, certainly for the Santa Daime, they've got that. Not so much so for the UDV. It's a little bit different. But do they have a standard liturgical practice or ritual practice? Yes, they do. Do they have clearly defined membership? Yes, they do. Right. So these are all kind of cultural assumptions that many Americans have around what constitutes religious practice. But you are making the argument, or not necessarily making the argument, but you are sharing that there are different ways of defining religion. And so looking at this idea of the congregation as self-determining, that you're not starting from a founding prophet, or the religion is not built around a person or a particular teaching or a particular doctrine, but I would say it sounds like the primary teaching is that through direct experience, which is only achieved through consuming the sacrament. You can't observe it from outside. You have to participate in it from inside. That will open you up to direct spiritual and religious experience, and that then the membership itself is able to determine, yes, we are engaged in religious and spiritual practice because these are the experiences that we are having, and through that we are developing a sense of community. We are developing a sense of religious understanding, as you say, around sense of conscience, sense of love, sense of responsibility towards self and towards others, that it increases people's sense of value and meaning in life, and that is also can produce various healing and therapeutic effects. And so it brings people into a more harmonious mode of being, and this is achieved through the actions of consuming the sacrament in this community setting. So while it doesn't have this list of things that we assume are what make a religion, it has all these other properties that we also can identify as belonging to this sphere of religious, cultural, and legal category of religious practice. And therefore, it deserves recognition of civil and legal rights.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so central for ayahuasca practice is drinking ayahuasca. So as they say in Latin, "Rei ipse loquitur," not without this. And so that is a central element. People come into ceremony. That's the requirement, is to drink ayahuasca.
Yeah. And this is fundamentally, this is what Congress tried to enshrine in law through the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, the Native American Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Because again, the Supreme Court said, you can believe that peyote is your sacrament and you are religiously free because you can believe that. But if you eat it, you're breaking the law. But of course, the response to that is there is no religion of peyote without the actual consumption of peyote because it is an experience first religion. And so you're making the same argument for ayahuasca, that it is not just believing that this is a divine drink and it gives us access to the sacred, but we actually need to consume it because that's where the religious practice and identity and experience comes from, is through the consumption of it. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So this is where it seems like it should be legally clear, right? That the precedent has been set. The Religious Freedom Restoration Act was enshrined into law. The Native American Religious Freedom Restoration Act was enshrined into law. This became the determiner. Yet you are enraptured in a court case that is, it sounds like it's been going on for a number of years now. So, and again, part of the problem is the DEA is involved in this, which is not a religious authority in any capacity. And even you mentioned, like with the judge, didn't even know how to pronounce the word ayahuasca. So there's an uphill battle, like against kind of deep levels of ignorance and even lack of understanding of what the law allows for. It sounds like that you're encountering in your own court case.
It's yeah. This is a big part of what we're up against in our court case. It should be clear, and so there is institutional inertia. There's also there is a whole body of law, a whole body of precedent-setting cases that are really informative on this particular topic, and they seem to have been forgotten. But that's not the way the law works, or ought to. So if you're at the wrong end of the legal barrel, ignorance of the law is absolutely no excuse. I think, but if you swing that around when it comes to institutions, ignorance of the law is no excuse. The denial of First Amendment rights does not eliminate those rights. It's just they're federal authorities saying you don't have a right to that. It's not up to them to say that right no longer exists or to deny it to you. And so I think we're up against federal judges and what would otherwise be prosecutors in most cases. I mean, really, like, who's the idea that we're suing the DEA is pretty preposterous. Not a lot of people would like do that. And yet it helps me sleep at night. We had to push back against an agency that effectively gone rogue and was totally content to ignore these key legal cases that's laid down the precedent and effectively the requirement to set up an exemption process, which they set up, and then they ignore that process too.
Yeah. So when did your court case first begin? How did it come about?
That was in May of 2020. So we're coming up on 6 years now.
Yeah.
Holy cow. Wow. It's like, really? It has to take 6 years to be able to do this? And still we're questioned whether we're committed to this process. So there was a period of time where we were going to file the exemption. So our attorney took a look at that. We actually completed it. We're going to file that exemption, or we were in process. We hadn't it wasn't, but as it wasn't fully completed. But as part of that process, we looked at it, and Charles Carrion, our attorney at the time, said, "Hey Scott, if you file this exemption, you have to stop serving ayahuasca." And I'm like, "Charles, what are you proposing?" He said, "I'm proposing that you sue the DEA." And the first word out of my mouth was balls. I'm like, "Charles, who's crazy enough to actually sue the DEA?" I said, I'm not against it. It's just that I'm going to need a few days to think about this one. So we just left it at that. And the next day I called them up and said, let's do it. We don't have any choice, right? Like eventually they'll come knocking. If we don't sue, eventually they'll come knocking. And then we'll be under a cloud of criminality, and that's going to affect the people that are running the ceremonies. It's going to affect the people that are coming into ceremonies. It'll affect our capacity to outreach, to actually speak openly about this. We'll have to hide it. That's no way to live. And so there was, as I saw it at the time, they left us no choice. We had nowhere to go but into federal court. And so we didn't complete their exemption. We didn't file the exemption. We won't file an exemption, and we're going to fight this case until we win it. And they're like, and I think, and they don't like that. It really pisses the DEA and the Department of Justice off. It pisses them like they get good and angry. They were getting good and angry. Now I think these days they're a little bit more exhausted and irritated than they are angry. So it used to be that if you worked for the Department of Justice, you were a lifer. You were there, and you get paid well. You get nice, steady employment, and you got a lot of respect. And then a few years ago, after the election, the Department of Justice hemorrhaged lawyers. They all bailed. And because they were all bailing, they realized, wow, if I don't get in with a good law firm now, we're playing musical chairs, I'm going to be left out. So you had all these lawyers quit. And they, as a matter of fact, on our hearing last year in April, we went in, and it was actually our first hearing in federal court. After 5 years, we finally got into federal court. And the judge said, okay, well, I think I can solve this. And we want to get the two of you talking. And so the opposing counsel, they had three attorneys, and they made their representations. They were quitting. This was a Thursday. Those attorneys' last day was the next day. It was Friday. So they could basically say whatever they wanted to. It didn't matter because they were leaving. They were going on to good law firms. So that's basically what they did. They told the judge whatever, but basically whatever that she wanted to hear. Yep. Okay. And then they washed their hands, free of the case. I'm not saying that those attorneys effectively lied, but they didn't have to do any of the work that they were leaving behind. And so other lawyers were left with that. Maybe they were left with more work than they needed or wanted. And so the end result after that process is, I think the DOJ is down to one attorney. There were three on this case, and now they're down to one. And I think she's kind of overworked. And I don't think, like these other attorneys, I don't think personally they have a stake in it. It's they understand. It's pretty clear they understand. We get people off of meth, we get people off of heroin, we get people off of hard drugs or coke, or we get people step away from alcoholism. It's that's what happens. And if we want to just point to research, that's what all the research shows. So from when the DEA steps up and they're trying to show research against ayahuasca, they don't have any.
Yeah.
And what does ayahuasca do? Yeah, it makes you throw up, and you have difficult psychological experiences, and then afterwards you realize that's what I needed. I needed to see my life, and then people, that difficult psychological experience, as they see it, we'll call it psychological, just for the sake of discussion here. I that that makes a big difference, and the um, the in any event, you know what? I think someone's knocking at the door. Can we take a little bit of a break? And
Sure.
okay, I'll be just do a little bit of a pause. I'll be right back. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to pause the recording. All right. All right. So it definitely sounds like you've encountered, as you've described, a lot of institutional inertia. It sounds like there's a lot of institutional ignorance. There's a lot of institutional incompetence and a lot of institutional just lack of preparedness due to ignorance around the law in general, as well as just everything that's happened at the Department of Justice and the DEA, and well, the whole federal government is basically run on whim and chaos these days. So we've lost a lot of the experts who might have been more prepared to take on a case like this and actually adjudicate it from a place of knowledge. But I do find it shocking that you have to educate them about what these laws are. Because as you say, that we as citizens, we can say, hey, I didn't know it was illegal to drive 100 miles an hour. We're still going to get a ticket. But we expect the same when we enter into a court case, that we expect that the judges and the lawyers, they should know what the law is. They should not be ignorant around what are the rights we are claiming here. Yet it sounds like this is what you've encountered.
That's exactly right. They just don't know, and the funny line is, let's say the the line at which things become abrasive, or where I have key questions that come up for me personally, is to what extent is that ignorance willful? And it starts to look at a certain stage like some of the tactics that are being used by the Department of Justice engage with a sort of willful ignorance. Like, even as much as they're asking for all of this information from us, they want everything. They want all of our correspondence, all the emails, all the names, everything. Like, for 5,000 people, it comes out to like 120,000 documents or something absurd like the and where we've like made great efforts to use some of the latest uh, um, software for something. We use something called Disco to go through these documents and to categorize them and to issue them under discovery rules as best we can. But we have to make sure that we're not releasing any information that includes people's names or any PI, what they call PII, or personally identifying information. So we need to clean that, because we're trying to like protect people who come through ceremony,
right?
And we don't want people on alert or concerned that they're going to be put under investigation. The idea is like that's why we're going through this process for clarifying our free right to practice so that people are protected. So it's an anathema to us to engage with core practices that demand that in the interest of protecting our congregation, that we deny them any rights to privacy, that we ignore protections for their First Amendment rights, for their associational privacy rights, for their rights to self-determination. We can't throw that stuff under the bus. That's why we're in the court case to begin with. And so as I mentioned with NAAVCP v. Alabama, there is like key case law under associational privacy. And we saw with our prior Judge Rosalind Silver, how she cited cases that cited and that had that case as foundational, even as she was denying us our right to associational privacy. So that starts to look like willful ignorance.
Yeah.
And at it's federal judges have been accused of being God. There's like lawyers joke about that. That they think they know. And so it's been quite an education to realize that the federal judges are trying to manage their caseload. That they're some of them are kind of underwater with all of these drug cases. That they've got so many drug cases involving, particularly in Arizona, with cartel, that they start treating every drug case, anything that involves drugs, like it's a drug cartel case. So the same kinds of tactics that get used on drug cartels get used on religious communities. Are you flipping kidding me? Like, is that how far this this boulder is rolled downhill? That it is absolutely outrageous. So institutional inertia has burned out, as I see it, judges, legal clerks, staff, attorneys of all types working within the Justice Department, because they're overwhelmed. And they're trying, and this case comes along and it doesn't fit into the cookie cutter mold.
Yeah.
It's not a drug case. It's not a cartel case. They're going after religious communities. And for all the Baptists out there, and for for the Methodists out there, and for the Catholics out there, and for the all those Christian churches out there, it undermines their clear rights. I'd thank you, Jehovah's Witnesses. All those Jehovah's Witnesses out there that went around knocking on doors, they've established so much First Amendment right case law, religious and free speech case law. Jehovah's Witnesses, go figure. Thank you. You don't have to agree with all of these various religious practices to know that's important enough to them to fight these legal cases, because they have the right to self-determination, that you're looking at a religious practice. And so they have to meet the criteria when you have people who are committed enough to go through this process, because it's essential and important to their view of the world.
Yeah. So it sounds like you've definitely been caught up in quite a bit of a slog in the court, but where are you now within this process? Do you see this resolving at some point, or is it just mired in these technical issues that are not allowing the court case to move forward effectively?
Well, we do have to resolve these discovery issues, and so we have some the filings that we have into the court now will resolve them one way or the other. Either the court will rule in our favor and we'll be able to sort of press through these key discovery issues, protect our people, and then effectively issue redacted documents so that they can see inside of our practice, but we just don't have to give away any names or emails. We have plenty of people who are willing to step up and give declarations, so they'll be able to talk with our team that run and manage AYA, Arizona Yahweh Assembly, but they'll also be able to talk with people who've stepped into ceremony and who've had significant changes in their lives, who consider it an essential religious practice in their life. So, we can supply them with all. We're not trying to keep them from seeing our practice. We're not trying to pretend that we're anything that other than what we are. I what we're trying to be is free. That's
Yeah.
at its simplest level. We want to engage in free practice. We got the right to. So that in terms of pushing through here, I think we're very close to either getting a determination for for uh, issuing all the discovery materials with redactions, or having them demand that we uh, give them all that we deny our membership associational privacy because they say so, uh, and then that forces us to either appeal it um, or uh, or dismiss the case. And so our objective is to fight this all the way. And so if we need to take it up a level and appeal it through the appellate process, the Supreme Court, that's just what we'll do.
Yeah. So, Scott, let's shift the conversation a little bit now to the North American Association of Visionary Churches. And for anybody listening who wants to check it out online, it is www.naavc.org. So when did this come about, and what is the role of the NAAVC within your own court case and potential, I would imagine, potentially other court cases, or the ongoing work of psychedelic churches to claim their rights as enshrined within the law and the Constitution to be able to practice freely and associate freely and to consume their chosen sacraments? I'm very interested to hear a bit more about this and where it comes from and how it all works.
Yeah, it started prior to the lawsuit. We were looking to build coalition, and so we did a fair amount of outreach. We were reaching out to, including to lawyers that were working on other cases, and we found it kind of and into other organizations, and there wasn't any clear coalition out there at the time, and because of that, it was hard to build a coalition among coalitions, and after having numerous meetings and seeing the differences of opinion within different groups, we realized what we needed to do was to start the NAAVC and start networking with the churches themselves rather than organizations that might be supporting the churches in different ways. And so that's what we did. We got the word out, and step by step, we started to connect up different churches. So today we have membership of something like 40 some odd churches around the country, and it's a pleasure to see them connect up in chat rooms and share share their stories, share photographs of their altars, invite one another to go to each other's ceremonies, to learn from each other, to go down to learn from each other about where they're going in South America, to be able to share their knowledge of master plans, and to connect the membership has a chance to share what they know and who they know around the country and in South America. So it's been extremely helpful for the membership, and we also help to address legal issues as well. So we offer legal protection through our attorneys, so we can refer to first-rate lawyers that can help to support the lawyers like Charles Carrion. We refer to attorneys that can support best practices and help them to, if they haven't already, to form uh, nonprofit corporate entities and laid the groundwork for forming their churches on a uh, on a legal framework, on a corporate framework. So when we're Arizona nonprofit, Arizona Yahweh Assembly is, as is NAAVC. For AYA, when we started, we filed as a nonprofit. We stated our purpose is as founded on religious fellowship, including the sacramental use of ayahuasca. So we stated that from the very beginning, and then that just laid down a framework for our bylaws and our and then other as we went along. Effectively, what we did was to simply document what we were doing. So we didn't have it wasn't like the text came first and then we applied that. We didn't sort of make anything up. We just mapped out what we were doing already. And so, let's say, for example, our one of our teachers down in South America, Ladio Melendez Garcia, he wrote a declaration on our behalf. And he's basically, to paraphrase him, he said, hey, down here, not only is ayahuasca legal, but people are free to practice, engage in the religious practice down here in Peru. And so he goes on to say, I just hope that one day that Scott will be free to practice as freely down up there in North America, in the United States, as he is free to practice down here in Peru.
Yeah.
And it actually turns out it makes a difference. You have a lot of combat vets who go out of country to sit with ayahuasca because they're active duty, and it's illegal here in the States, or they have security clearances, or what have you, or they're what they do becomes public in some way, and it becomes detrimental to their career. They need a legal framework in place, otherwise they can't sit with the medicine. And some of these guys are they understand that they're running a lot of risks and they need to get a leg up on their PTSD. So that's what Heroic Hearts is all about, for instance. But they go down to Costa Rica to sit with ayahuasca. They don't do it here in the States.
Yeah.
Because there are legal considerations here in the States. From our standpoint, we also work with a group called the Arizona Yahweh. It's Aya Mission, and Aya Mission works with the Arizona Yahweh Assembly. So that group started with Ulysses Lopez, and Ulysses came into ceremony, and he said after he got a leg up on his PTSD, and he was a decorated combat vet and served a couple of tours in Iraq, and took some hits, lost. He's the guy who's been through a lot, and today he's strong and he's vital, and I think he's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and he's bringing in other veterans in ayahuasca ceremonies through Aya Mission. Once he saw that it was beneficial to him, he said, I've got some friends, and let's bring them in. And so they set up a battle buddy arrangement where veterans would come in with other veterans. And so you'd come in with someone who's experienced and practiced with ayahuasca. And it works. It works, right? And it's not a structuralist approach. Although there's pre-integration, there's post-integration, there's plenty of conversations where these guys can work through, but it's not. Underneath that is the non-material, is the divine, and the healing of the spirit, of the human spirit. I mean, what a shame, right? That people go to hospitals and your doctor may well be looking at you like you're a sack of chemical. And then here's a prescription to affect you as a chemical being. But beyond that, sorry, I can't help you. And, there are other vets who for decades were going into talk therapy. And I've seen the money shot with talk therapy, and it's a flat line. So, you get young guys coming in and they're looking at the Vietnam vet guys and they say to themselves, is this what I got to look forward to? Is that it? Like, it's a flat line at best. You're not talking improvement. Like you're looking at 22 vets a day killing themselves. And so it's preposterous to me that the DA is standing in the way of that. So what the NAABC is doing is to networking, because there's strength in numbers. And what we want to see are more ayahuasca churches, churches working with other sacraments for the purpose of healing the spirit, right? And seeing people heal, not be treated, not like endless treatment, not like over medicated or under medicated or like prescribed to some like a hole of oblivion. It's like the desperate. There are like clear alternatives, and now we're looking at a community that understands those clear alternatives, and there's strength in numbers. I think what the DEA is looking at right now is they're looking at a revolution. They've got a revolution on their hands. And they understand. I think it's one of the reasons why they're pressing so hard on getting our membership lists. I view it as tactical, structurally. Like I said, I don't think they're really against us. I think I view it as a tactical approach to send a lesson to send a message to other churches. Like, if you file, we're gonna go after your membership list. So that's one of the reasons why it's so important for AYA and the NAABC for us to press ahead with this. And when we initiated our case, it was a joint case, NAABC and NAABC, AYA and NAABC together in filing our initial complaint. And the case has gone through multiple evolutions. We've had to, in some ways, sort of trim back our approach and simply to focus on our core elements of this case, which is free practice. What that will mean in the end, as I see it, will be beneficial not only for just one church, for AYA, but beneficial to all these other churches, and clear the pathway so you don't have to go through 6 years very expensive litigation. And so what I would love to see, what my fond wish, my prayer, is that these churches can practice, claim their right to self-determination. Then it's up to the DEA to formalize that process and to assist them in gaining their exemption to the CSA. So we're not having to flip and fight for it.
Yeah.
At every turn. Like, the churches have the right to self-determination, not the DEA. So if the churches have the right to self-determination, and that's ensconced in case law clearly, in ways that they can no longer deny, then without penalty, then we'll have potentially we'll have a DEA that that has a clear model for the least restrictive means for these churches to gain exemptions without having the whole legal wrangle. That kind of answered some of the elements of your question, I think.
Yeah, well, if I could just comment on a few of those pieces there, that I definitely see the value in having an organization like this. That I think that it's a fairly accurate description when you say that there is a revolution going on, in the sense of the number of entheogenic churches and psychedelic churches has really exploded over recent years. And it's almost like people finally got the message that, oh, there is a legal avenue here. And I think that this is quite important, that as you've been discussing with like psychedelic therapy, that we now have pretty much all the medical evidence that we could ever need, that psychedelic therapy really does improve people's lives on a number of different levels. And I know there's going to be more research done, but all the research is coming back with this is very effective. But here in the United States, we have no legal right to health care. We have no legal right to therapy. That doesn't exist as an area of law. But freedom of religion is an established, it's a fundamental area of law. And therefore, so many of these churches have been formed to offer various outlets for healing and for therapy within the protection of religious freedom. But like on my social media feeds, almost every day it seems like a new psychedelic church pops up. So they are under development around the country, but having a centralized organization, I think would be really valuable, because everybody's filling out their own paperwork. Everybody's fighting their own legal battles. But as you say, there's strength in numbers, so that if these churches can come together and support each other, then hopefully it won't be the case that every single individual church needs to take the government to court in order to have their religious freedom recognized. And I think that where most of these churches are operating is at the local and state level. So they might be filling out religious freedom paperwork with their local state, but they're not attempting anything with the federal government. And that's where really I think the biggest threat is, because as you say, the DEA could decide at any point, we're going to come knocking on your door and we want to know all your members, and we're going to be taking, punitive legal action against you guys. So even if somebody has set up a local church and registered with their state, like I think Oregon is very good on that front, but not every state is. But that does, even if somebody checks off all the boxes for their state authorities, that doesn't have any impact on what the federal government may or may not do. And as we've been discussing, that it seems like a lot of what's happening at the federal government seems to be very inconsistent, seems to be understaffed, undereducated. So it leaves a great deal of uncertainty for these religious communities that just want to claim their religious rights. So like I don't run a church, I'm not part of a church, but if I did, I would want to join the NAAVC, because I think that that's a significant development. And I think that these churches can support each other and then make more legal headway. It just seems logical to me.
Yeah, same here. Thanks for saying that. It is yeah, I think for a lot of these churches, even as much as there's a connection with many of them, even just in terms of this kind of global travel back and forth between the United States and Costa Rica, Ecuador, Brazil, Peru. There is a growing body of knowledge. You have shamans and teachers in South America that are bringing many of these bringing individuals along, and then in that bringing churches along. Making the connections up here in the States has offers these sort of open vistas. Things open up for the members of these churches in ways that seem startling. So that there are these little malokas, these roundhouses that have sprung up in around the country, all sorts of beautiful places. And so they may be on top. So now, they're sitting with ayahuasca at 8,000 feet in Colorado during a snowstorm. Well, that's a long way from the Amazon basin, I can tell you that. And you have churches that are sharing their body of knowledge and giving a view into the other churches, and there and there's a they have their own sacraments, and so for some of these churches, the focus is on psilocybin, and you have the different sacraments. These churches are able to sort of, get, when people travel, they're able to connect their members up with other churches as well. So we're learning from each other. We've started something called the Sister Maloka Project, which is basically, the idea there is to connect up the Malokas, spiritual roundhouses in the United States, with Malokas roundhouses down in South America. So the thought experiment is something like this. If you had 100 Malokas and you separated them by 10 miles each, you would cover 1,000 miles. And now take that 1,000 miles of Maloka and stretch it into the jungle, against the burn line for the Amazon, as a way to push back against deforestation. There are not a lot of people who are taking the torches and burning the jungle, and there are economic incentives, but they're really kind of lazy economic incentives. And so it involves clear cutting and then planting cacao or sugarcane or even coca, and then having the result be that the land eventually gives out after a few years. It doesn't take long. And then the cattle come in, you got yourself a cattle farm. And that's the story of deforestation around the Amazon. And what comes in supposedly are jobs, but really what you get drugs and alcohol and crime, as opposed to supporting what's already going on on the ground level, which are in many respects small ayahuasca churches or little malokas run by shaman in South America. That is an entirely different outlook. Supporting communities in what they already know and what they already do. Not going down to be a do-gooder. And if they're working with Cambo, or which is a frog venom, that's extraordinary properties for clearing up all sorts of physical issues. You're working with master plants, you're working with ayahuasca, you're working with this whole pharmacopoeia of plants in South America, within communities that know that retain that body of knowledge. And the objective there would be to take what they already know and start teaching it inside of the schools, inside of their own schools, to build curriculum so that teach, believe it or not, like teach the Quechua inside the school, and not having walk 5 miles down the mountain and back up again to learn Spanish exclusively. So what you'll end up doing are teaching these kids to be liminal figures. They'll know the plants, they'll retain that body of knowledge, and then they'll be able to teach North Americans who come down, not as ayahuasca tourists, although, by the way, I'm not against ayahuasca tourism. If you like ayahuasca, so-called ayahuasca tourism, air quotes, disappeared today, that body of knowledge would be gone in 2 generations, 3. Poof. Right? The fact that people are going down to the Amazon and to witness the jungle firsthand and to sit with ayahuasca has a tremendous healing impact. Yes, there are challenges down there, that could push people past their comfort level. You want to, you get, sometimes things go sideways down in the jungle. You want to keep a clear view of that. But I think organizations here in North America working in tandem with groups down in South America, working with these plant medicines and being able to support those communities around within the ring of the Amazon will go a long, long way to preserving the rainforest. And so the Amazon doesn't become or just stay as a video. It's not a video of the Amazon. It's for increasingly, I would love for it to be a place I visited for people. That's just a place that they love, and a place that they have connections with the people there, a place where they learn, a place where they can then learn and then teach, or a place where they can invite through cultural exchange people who know up here in the States, and vice versa, so that it's not a question of helping the underprivileged. It's not power over or power under, it's power share. That's the heart and soul of coalition building. And so NAAVC ends up being an organization over time, it's my fond wish, becomes an organization that ties both North and South America together. And you look at a guy like Joe Tafur, who wrote the Fellowship of the River, and incidentally, his church, the Church of the Eagle and the Condor, they had their own legal case, and they earned a settlement with the DEA, and so the Church of the Eagle and Condor is free to practice. So Joe, a couple of years ago, gave a talk. He works with Andrew Weil through Andrew Weil's Center for Integrative Medicine at the University of Arizona. And so Joe went through his medical internship and his shaman apprenticeship at the same time.
Yeah.
One down in South America, one up in North America, for people that are not familiar with the story. I've seen him give talks on what some people call the prophecy of the eagle and the condor, and that particular prophecy says that when the eagle and the condor soar together, there'll be peace on earth. And so it's a big dream, right? Because, sometimes it feels like love is at a premium. And sometimes it feels that way. You look around. But there's, Joe Tafur, who is a physician, medical medically licensed here in the States, also trained with a shaman in South America, and uh, there he is talking about the prophets of the eagle and the condor, and laying out the timetable. And his message simply was, the doc I saw him give, it's happening right now. Be a part of it. How can you be a part of it? Go to South America, practice. Come up here to the States, practice. Like, step in, connect with your own conscience, support others, stand in coalition, understand that these, like what you thought were simple spiritual practices, are actually, in fact, religious practices. Right? Like study, learn, support, help, raise your awareness, and give the gifts of your heart to others. Like, it's simple, right? And the extraordinary thing is that it's happening now. And as far as I can tell, other than institutions, nobody is standing in our way. So we have a clear opportunity to make this happen now. And from my perspective, like, key to this is this court case. Like, I want it done. I want to win. And we got a real opportunity to do it now.
Yeah. Well, Scott, that feels like a good place to wrap it up for today. And I just want to remind the listening audience again that you can go to www.naavc.org. You can see the mission statement. You can see the topic of legal advancement. It's got frequently asked questions. So anybody who's running a church or thinking of running a psychedelic church, I think that this looks like a good resource to me. It looks like a good way of creating that momentum through coalition, through numbers, as you've been saying. And Scott, I would want to invite you to please keep me updated about your own court case and where that is going with the Arizona Yahweh Assembly. And hopefully we don't need too many more trailblazers at the legal level so that this can become ultimately easier for people through those networks, through those coalitions, that it becomes that the legal arguments will have been made, that it won't be the case that every single church has got to go through this whole process. It could become more normalized, and that through that education of the public, through the education of the legal system and of the institutions, that hopefully this can become more normalized so that people don't have to jump through endless hoops to get rights that are guaranteed to us within our Constitution. And then hopefully we can reach that point where, like your friends in Peru are saying, hey, we hope you someday that you get the same religious freedoms up there in the United States as we have in Peru, that hopefully it's just, yeah, this is a legal right. This is a religious right. And but it does take trailblazers. It does take people who are willing to push back against the system in order to create that change. And that happened here with the Santo Daime Church and Jonathan Goldman, the Church of the Holy Light of the Queen. Earlier than that, the Native American Church, the Santo Daime, as you mentioned, Joe Tafur, and the Church of the Eagle and the Condor. But it's going to take more. And so I would just want to thank you for doing that and for making the NAAVC available for people to join as members. And I would encourage my listeners who are running psychedelic churches, like, check it out, look it up and see if you want to become a member and contribute to that coalition, and that there is power in numbers, and that as all these churches are coming into existence, might as well band together and support each other so that just makes it safer and more accessible for everyone. Seems like a no-brainer to me, but that's just me.
Yeah, that's just you with a lot of other people on your side with that, Martin. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, my friend, for the invitation to be on your podcast. You're doing such great work here, and getting the word out, and it's been an absolute pleasure to join you today. So thank you, my friend. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for being with me, Scott.
Okay. Take care. Have a great day.
All right.